I'm super excited to have Sahim Ali here with us today. Sahim is one of the most talented and innovative Shakespeare directors working in the United States today. Sahim grew up in Nairobi and he got his MFA in directing from Columbia University. He has received several awards, including the Sir John Gielgud Fellowship from the Stage Directors and Choreographers Foundation. Many of us were blown away this summer by Sahim's production of Richard II. This was supposed to be a Shakespeare in the Park live production featuring an all-Black cast, along the lines of the Much Ado About Nothing directed by Kenny Leon in 2019. Then the pandemic hit and live theater was canceled everywhere. Meanwhile, the Black Lives Matter protests put issues of race onto the center stage for everyone in the arts and beyond. Sahim and the Public Theater responded by creating a radio play of Richard II, divided into 4 episodes with commentary and interviews. It was really a revelation for so many of us about what the audio-only medium could do. And in fact, he reached over 42,000 audience members by the time the 4th podcast was released. Very exciting. And so we're really happy to have Sahim Ali here with us today. Hi, Sahim. So fantastic to have you with us. So I thought we'd just talk a little bit at the beginning about your journey into acting and directing. You wrote a wonderful piece for the New York Times about how you discovered theater as a teenager, growing up in Nairobi, and traveling to London for the first time in 1993. Can you tell us a little bit about your theatrical conversion experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I grew up in Nairobi, born and raised, and I was fortunate that my father was an airline pilot, and so we got to travel a lot in my childhood. And on this one trip to London, I saw a poster that had an Australian soap opera star that I had a crush on. And so I was like, oh, and it was some advertising something called Grease. So I thought, oh, I want to go and see him in this thing called Grease. And I convinced my dad, I got a ticket. I saw the show and I was completely blown away. I just like, the energy, the power, the music, the singing, the dancing. I'd never seen anything like it. And so when I got back to Kenya, my impulse was, well, I wanted to recreate it again somehow. I wanted to make that happen. And so I set out to write the script from memory, kind of as I remembered the production. And I had the cassette with me because I bought the cassette. And so I used that to jog my memory as well. And then I got my friends together and I said, we're going to put on this show. It's called Grease. There's songs in it. We're going to dance. We're going to act. We're going to sing. It's going to be amazing. So I kind of assumed the role of putting this show together because I figured, someone has to do it, right? So so essentially I directed it and I wanted to play Danny Zuko and I wanted to choreograph it. It was like very, I just wanted to somehow replicate the feeling that I got when I saw this production on stage and figure out how to make it work. So that was my gateway drug into the theater, that production of Grease.
And I think we even have the graphics from your original directorial debut.
Yes, we do.
How did you make this?
So,
is it a Sharpie pen?
Well, it was a Sharpie. I mean, the logo is a complete ripoff of the London production, basically traced from that. And then everything else, made from us. So it's State House Girls and Jamhuri High, because Jamhuri High was my high school. It was boys only. And so, I wasn't really subversive at the time. I wasn't going to have boys play girls, not yet. So I was like, okay, let's go and get a girls' school. So I convinced this drama department in the girls' school to do this co-production essentially with us and put on the show together. So that's, the poster for the show right there.
That is just so much fun. I'm so glad you saved that because it has such meaning now when we look at your illustrious career that came out of this early production of Grease from memory. It's just fantastic. So what about Shakespeare? When did you start getting interested in Shakespeare, and what kinds of stories did you feel that you could tell with Shakespeare and only Shakespeare?
So interestingly, there's a direct line from Grease to Shakespeare. because I put on that production and someone came to see me in it, and he was a director and he was doing a production of Romeo and Juliet in Nairobi. And so he cast me as Mercutio in that production. And so it was the first time that I'd been in a show, except for Greece, the first time with Shakespeare text. And I just completely fell in love with the process of unlocking the language and like the emotions of the characters, and just like the size of it. And I had never watched a director work. So actually the process of being there made me want to be around that more. So he was a gentleman named James Falkland. He was a white colonial kind of generations who had settled in Nairobi. And so he would put on these productions of Shakespeare and of British shows like Charlie's Aunt. And so I asked him after that Greece experience, like, I want to learn. So I would sit in on his rooms as he was directing other productions and just kind of observe what he was doing. I was so enthusiastic about the productions that I kind of memorized the lines. And so sometimes when an actor couldn't show up, I would step in and take over the role on a night that an actor got sick. So being around, especially that production of Romeo and Juliet was like, was the first time. And then I started to read plays after that. But it was very hard. I remember finding it very hard to like read a text and understand it, because I hadn't studied it in school. I hadn't, Romeo and Juliet was the first time that I was in a production. So without having a director to kind of help me unlock it, I wasn't able to just like open Hamlet and read it. It was beyond my level of comprehension at that point. But Romeo and Juliet was really it.
Wow. That's really, really fantastic. And now we'll come back to Romeo and Juliet a little bit later, but this remains a key text for you and a key way to unlock Shakespeare for audiences. It is gateway Shakespeare for so many people. And it remains just a kind of a profound meditation on love and rivalry and aggression and all these different issues. It's fantastic. I got very interested, in Twelfth Night and Twelfth Night in Migration, and I was interested in incorporating Twelfth Night into some of my teaching. And I found some minimal records online that you had done a production at the Public Theater in 2017 for their mobile unit. And you chose to include, or to really stage it around immigration and bilingualism. And really, it's very hard to find much about this production. So I was hoping you could maybe talk us through some elements of that, and also what the mobile unit is, and why you wanted to tell the Twelfth Night story in this way for these audiences.
Absolutely. So when I moved to the US, I was in Boston for my undergraduate education. And my first trip to New York, I couldn't afford to see much theater. And so I got a ticket to this thing called Shakespeare in the Park, where I could get a free ticket. And so I went and I saw a production of Twelfth Night. And I was just like, I couldn't believe that this production that had this incredible scale and scope, and that was free, that I could see for free. And all of a sudden I was just like, oh, I want to move to New York. I want to live in this city. I want to do theater, and I want to direct a show at the Delacorte and work at the Public Theater. So that production and that experience really was like the magnet for me to really look seriously about applying to graduate schools, moving to New York, and finding a way to align myself with the Public Theater. I moved to New York for graduate school and was seeing a lot of theater at the Public. And then I found out about the mobile unit. And the mobile unit is one of the programs at the Public. The Public has different levels of Shakespeare. You have Shakespeare in the Park. You have sometimes indoor productions. You have the mobile unit. And the mobile unit, what it does is takes stripped down productions of Shakespeare and makes them mobile. So for folks who aren't able to come to the Delacorte, who don't have the luxury of spending the whole day in line for a ticket, there's a real access barrier to those tickets. Like, yes, they're free, but you have to know about it. You have to be able to afford to spend a day standing in line and coming to see it. So, and there are all these barriers to deciding you're going to spend an evening of Shakespeare at the theater. So what the mobile unit does is it takes Shakespeare to the communities, to the boroughs, to prisons, to homeless shelters, to community centers, and brings Shakespeare there so that you don't have to travel to the Delacorte, and you have a production of Shakespeare that's really accessible and open and allows the language and the storytelling to function in a way that just really dismantles the barrier of colonialism, of feeling like, oh, Shakespeare is something for like those people over there who like are this smart or this educated. And I followed the mobile unit around, and I just fell in love with the kind of like scrappy, vibrant productions that I was seeing in these different locations. And so I pitched and pitched and pitched until finally I got the opportunity to direct Twelfth Night. And in thinking about the play, I was really thinking of a way to unlock the play that took place in America. I was looking for a city, a community where the sense of like joy and fun and music and culture, that to me, Twelfth Night has music so much. And like, so like, what music did I feel like I wanted to be part of the tapestry? What culture did I feel like I wanted to infuse that story with? And at the time, I had a friend who was Cuban, and he had come to the US, and he told me his story about being an immigrant and this thing called the wet foot, dry foot policy that the Reagan administration had administered, kind of like as a middle finger to the Castro administration, basically daring Cuban citizens to try and make it to America. And if you were able to set foot on dry land, you were on an automatic path to citizenship. If you were caught in the water on the way here, you would be deported and sent back to Cuba. So if you had a dry foot, meaning you were on dry land, you could be a citizen. But if you had a wet foot, you would be sent back. And I just like, that completely blew my mind. And speaking to someone who had this experience, I thought it unlocked something for the beginning of the play for me, because I thought, well, because Shakespeare doesn't really tell us why Viola and Sebastian are on that boat. We just know that there's a wreck and they arrive here. So I thought, well, what if they're Cuban citizens trying to make it to the US, and they arrive in South Beach in Miami, and all of a sudden, like, I was really excited by that storytelling, by the music that was possible, by like the sense of life that was. I'll show you a couple of photographs from that production, so that you can see just like a bit of the sense of, there we go. And so this is in a production at the LBGT Center in New York. As you can see, there was a mobile unit of music, because I really wanted music to feel mobile within this. So there was like a street performer who had this like cart that he would go around playing music at. That's Feste that you see over there. Again, interested in androgyny and gender in the play. So I thought, well, Feste should be played by a woman, but is she a woman? Is she not? Malvolio, that's him. They're really kind of like, you know, for me, like Malvolio was like a Cuban Republican, like someone who has very like, you know, conservative views in America, in that culture, because he has that really sense of like stricture. And so that lens for me just like really allowed me to see him. There you have the Three Fools with Mariah, kind of hiding behind a plastic tree. So really, you could really colorful, really lively. The audience sits all around. So really the action goes in and out. This was the fight between Sir Toby and Sebastian. Yes. There's Viola and Orsino. There's Olivia. Yeah, and what the thing that really unlocked the language component for me for this play was thinking about the location, thinking about, again, like accessibility. And I thought, if they are coming from Cuba and they're settling in Miami, then language, they're like, how can we use language in a way that makes sense for this culture? And so I thought, well, if they're coming from Cuba, that last scene where the two twins see each other, I'm someone who's bilingual myself, and I revert to my mother tongue, which is Swahili, when I'm with family. So I just thought, well, what if in that moment when they see each other, they revert to Spanish? Like, that's the language that they speak, and that's how they recognize each other. Because how can you use language as recognition? Language is family. And so that unlocked something too for me, in terms of how language could function. And in the moments when Viola was by herself speaking to the audience, if she's more comfortable speaking in Spanish then, and she moves back and forth between Spanish and English, and just a sense of Viola being someone who's an immigrant to this country, who gets a job, who works, who like finds a way to like make a life in this place. It all felt like it was telling the story about people coming here, about a culture that had this vibrancy, and about how language could function in a bilingual way, in a way that started to really infuse Shakespeare Because for me, Shakespeare is like a different language. Like the process of table work, of opening up, you're literally sitting and you are translating words. Like, this is what this word meant. This is what this word actually like means. And so to me, it's no different from like from linguistically unlocking a language. And so in this country where Spanish is the second most widely spoken language after English, I just felt like it'd be an opportunity to tell like an American story that's happening on this soil, but then really celebrate the sense of immigration and the sense of bilingualness as happens in a city like Miami. So yeah, that's a bit about that 12th Night production.
Beautiful. Eli, you often begin your directing from the music. What are your thoughts about Sahim's approach to the Twelfth Night?
Well, that's the thing. It's just brilliant. I mean, I want to hear the music that you used, right? But it's great to see the photos. And you talked about it being scrappy and vibrant. It looked every bit of that, like really scrappy, right? So was there, and then the audience is super close, which we know is always kind of raises the temperature in the room, right? So did you find, Sahim, that the very like scrappiness of it, that nature of kind of being really close to the audience and having like a blow up tree and just being able to just kind of hit the ground running, did that kind of give the ensemble energy and fuel the production?
Absolutely, because that's the strength of the mobile unit, the proximity, the surround nature of it, the fact that you are through the audience, you are infusing the space with like Shakespeare's text and that energy. It was essential. That's why I wanted to do a comedy, because I just felt like for that particular form and that particular sense of like the physical relationship, speaking to the audience, directly, asking like, like Feste doubles with the police officer who arrests Antonio at the end. So Feste coming in and saying to an audience member, like, hold my hat, and then doing the scene and then coming and getting the hat and putting it on, just making the audience, the bottle, the letter that Malvolio finds, I wanted it to be like a message in a bottle, like in a thing. So an audience member had like a cue, so they had the bottle at their feet and then they had to kick it at the right moment, and then Malvolio would see it. So really allowing the audience to feel like they're participants in the storytelling. I mean, with Shakespeare and with comedy, I think there's just like, there's no better way of being able to break the barrier between audience and performer.
That's great. And were you able to reach a lot of Spanish speaking audiences with the mobile unit? Did you feel like that really resonated for the community?
Yeah, we were. Yeah. It really began for me just getting excited about that possibility. I would say that that production of Twelfth Night was maybe 15% Spanish and 75 and 85%, maybe like 20% Spanish, I would say, and 80% English, Shakespeare's text. Yeah. And so I was just interested with Romeo y Julieta, which we'll talk about, of furthering that balance and furthering that conversation.
Right. Well, it's very inspiring. So, I mean, let's talk about Richard II. This was really, we were all pandemic bound, and we discovered, so many of us independently, and then started sending the link around to all of our friends and posting it, on the Shakespeare Center website and elsewhere. I mean, this was really just a very exciting project to take a quite difficult play, not usually a crowd pleaser, a lot of characters, a lot of English history, and translate this to audio and make it speak to the Black Lives Matter protests, bringing in Ayanna Thompson and Jim Shapiro, but also interviewing actors about how they felt doing this production at this moment from their subject positions. I've just really never seen anything like it, and I think it inspired many of us to not just throw up our hands in despair that we couldn't perform live, but really to work with Zoom and work with audio and try to continue to communicate through theater. So there was a lot of courage there, as well as a lot of invention and success. So can you just tell us a little bit about, what was your vision for the live production? How did that germinate? What did you want to achieve? And then how did you do that pivot to audio?
Yeah, so Oscar Eustace, who runs the Public Theater, approached me with the idea to do Richard II, because I didn't know the play at all. and it's a play that he'd been talking about with Andre Holland for a while, because Andre had expressed interest in it. So I said, well, I don't know it, I'm going to read it. So I read it, and it's challenging, that play, and there's a reason why it isn't done very often, because Shakespeare drops you into a socio-political context that he does not set up. You just immediately in this scene where they're arguing about something, and then they want to fight, and you're like, well, I missed the part where someone told me what they're fighting about and what's happened. And so for the physical production, I'd been thinking a lot about how to unlock that. So I was going to set the opening scene at a funeral procession, so that we know that you know, someone has died. There's a casket there, and that like adds like some visual storytelling, so that you understand like, oh, like they're actually talking about someone who's just passed away, and that allows me then to understand the emotional stakes. So we've been building that production with Andre there, and I've been very deliberate about the casting too, because I said, well, if this production is going to have a Black man playing the king, that's going to have repercussions for me in terms of the rest of the storytelling. If Bolingbroke was played by a white actor, then you have a story about a white leader taking over from an ineffectual Black king, and I didn't want to tell that story. So it was very clear to me that the person who was taking over from Richard had to be someone who was diametrically, at least at an identical level in terms of identity. And so a Black woman just felt to me like an exciting opportunity to tell a story of capability in terms of gender and in terms of race. So that informed for me where the center of power lied and where the transfer of power lied, and how I wanted to build the ensemble to reflect that in terms of, it didn't have to be and I didn't want it to be an all Black production, because I didn't want to say we have a Black king because we are in such and such a place. You know, we don't do that with white productions. So I didn't want to diminish this to being that. We have productions where that are open enough in terms of interpretation, with white people at the center, and I wanted to afford this production the same thing. So the casting was very deliberate in terms of that. COVID hit, and we had to abandon the plan to do the production. And Oscar again said, well, why don't we do it as a radio play? WNYC is interested. And I thought, oh, radio, you know, kind of archaic, kind of old school. I don't know if I can get interested, but let me think about it. And I did a pass through the script, and I thought, you know what? I bet there are ways to take some of the challenges and really explore the power that audio affords in a way that could be interesting and exciting. Because just really breaking down like how audio works, right? You have text, you have music, you have sound design, in terms of environments and atmosphere. And so I did an adaptation that really mapped out how I imagined it happening, or how I heard it happening rather. And doing some things that I could have done on stage. For example, Gaunt dying, I thought, well, what if we're in a hospital room? You know, we all know the beep of a heart monitor. You know, we all know what happens when it flatlines. Like, how can we use those audio tools to really help us tell stories? And so I got really excited about that. And the week before the first rehearsal, George Floyd was murdered. And I thought, well, okay, this is very difficult, because I've been in certain moments in my life when something in current events happened, and I had to, you know, have a conversation with the cast. When Trump was elected in 2016, that was a real hit. And so that next day in rehearsal, we had to sit around a table and talk and grieve and really kind of rally ourselves, like how we're going to move forward in this world. And I thought, this is a very similar moment, but I don't know these actors. We're not going to be together. We're going to be on Zoom. How can we possibly have a moment where we share in our grief? And especially with a cast of Black actors, like, should we be doing this? Like, should we still be doing theater? Should we be doing Shakespeare? I had real trepidation about that. And so in the first meeting, rather than do a traditional kind of dive in and read the text, I really used the opportunity to share my own ambivalence, to be really vulnerable and open about like my misgivings about whether we should do this or not, whether it was a worthy endeavor. And I asked the cast to speak very openly about the experience. And what came out of that conversation became the material that we used to envelope the production. So the conversations about Blackness in America, Blackness in theater, how the moment was really informing how artistry and advocacy can live side by side, because the actor said, well, I want to go out and protest, but I also want to rehearse this play. So I don't have to choose one, I can do both. you know? And so we had actors on Zoom rehearsing for 2 hours and then going on in a Black Lives Matter protest afterwards, and really finding ways to be true to their identity and also true to their artistry. And so that's how we created the material, because I thought, well, if we were doing this at the Delacorte and this happened, we would talk about it, but we couldn't really talk about it on stage. This way we can. This can be actual dialogue that helps inform the listener and brings them into our world, into our process in a way that felt truthful and honest, and also just allowed the moment to be present. And so that's how we shifted from a Delacorte production to a radio play, and then also how we allowed the discourse to inform the audience's experience of the play.
Amazing. You wouldn't happen to have a little video clip to share with us, would you?
Oh, well, I have an audio clip.
An audio clip.
Yeah? Okay, amazing. Yes, I do have an audio clip to share. So I chose this clip. This is from Act 4, Scene 1. It's the scene where Richard asks for a mirror, and a mirror is brought to him, and he's staring at his own reflection. And that's a moment where on stage I'd thought about creating, because I'd wanted to highlight certain moments on Richard's trajectory, because it's a very didactic play. It's a very like historical play. And so I wanted to squeeze out any kind of like abstraction or surreal kind of moments that I could. So the moment where Richard descends from the wall down to Bolingbroke, I thought about a moment of like imbuing that with theatricality. And the moment of the mirror too, I thought, well, it'd be amazing if when he got that mirror, everything else on stage vanished, and it was just him and his reflection that were highlighted. So I thought, well, what's the audio equivalent of that? How can we go inside Richard's head in this moment in a way that makes sense? So I'll play you the clip of that moment so you can hear what we came up with. Okay, I think I need to refresh this.
America began as an experiment.
Okay, so I'm going to skip forward. I'd set it up, but it's because it's online at the 45:30 mark. Okay. All right. Here we go.
Myself. Oh, that I were a mockery king of snow, standing before the sun of Bolingbroke, to melt myself away in water drops. Good king, great king, and yet not greatly good. And if my word be sterling, yet in England, let it command a mirror hither straight, that it may show me what a face I have, since it is bankrupt of his majesty.
Go, some of you, and fetch a looking glass.
Read o'er this paper while the glass doth come.
Fiend, thou torments me ere I come to hell.
Urge it no more, my lord Northumberland.
The commons will not then be satisfied.
They shall be satisfied. I'll read enough when I do see the very book indeed where all my sins are writ, and that's myself. Give me that glass, and therein will I read. Huh. No deeper wrinkles yet. Hath sorrow struck so many blows upon this face of mine, and made no deeper wounds? Ah, flattering glass, like to my followers in prosperity, thou dost beguile me. Was this face the face that every day under his household roof did keep 10,000 men? Was this the face that like the sun did make beholders wink? Is this the face which faced so many follies that was at last outfaced by Bolingbroke? A brittle glory shineth in this face, as brittle as the glory is the face. For there it is, cracked in 100 shivers. Mark, silent king, the moral of this sport, how soon my sorrow hath destroyed my face.
The shadow of your sorrow hath destroyed the shadow of your face.
Ooh, say that again.
Okay.
It's just wonderful. And that's Andre Holland as Richard. It's just
Yeah,
very,
that's Andre Holland as Richard and Miriam Hyman as Bolingbroke. And you hear even the way that Andre performs the text. It feels so contemporary. It feels so fluid. It just like trippingly off the tongue, as they say. It's just like so magnanimous and and the scoring there, what you heard, like something that feels like a little eerie, a little internal, kind of like heightening the moment all the way through to the glass breaking. So that's an area where it's sound design, it's composition, it's performance, it's like all these elements telling the story in a way that I felt really amplified the what radio can do so well, what audio can do so well. So yeah.
So many questions. It's just, I love the production. And I don't know that I've ever really listened to a Shakespearean radio play so carefully, and it was just kind of brilliantly put together. All those elements that you were talking about, the acting was great, and the sound cues especially, I thought really enhanced it. I wondered, I'm thinking as I'm listening, I'm imagining things happening, which is, of course, what you want to have happen. Did you actually stage the actors, Sahim? Did you and when they were recording, were they actually acting it out at all, or did they have to stay so close to the microphone that they basically felt like they were doing stuff but they weren't?
Yeah, that was, the paradox of it, right? Because they want to move, they want to turn their heads, they want to, let us sit up on the ground. He wants to sit up on the ground, but he can't because he has to stay with the microphone. And it wasn't really like he could move with the mic because it's such a controlled environment. And so I really had to listen for the sense of the movement, the sense of the action, and them not to do it as much. So it became this this kind of balancing act, because one of the things to say is that in terms of the process of recording this is that we were rehearsing on Zoom, right? And so traditionally you'd be in a studio where you would be the actors would be seeing each other, they would be playing off of each other, but because it was on Zoom, you have lag, you're in your own space, everyone's recording themselves, and there's a whole part of the process where everyone had to record their own audio, upload their own audio onto Dropbox, and then an engineer put it all together. So there's this whole kind of technical element that I tried to get the actors not to worry about, and just say, don't worry about that. You just concentrate on the performance. We've got the rest of it. We're going to do the rest of it. So it was a real challenge for them, but they did excellent work.
No, they did a great job. But I'm just wondering, did you, just as a follow-up, did you have to say things like, it doesn't really sound like you're sitting down there? Because you're just listening and thinking, does that sound like a sit down? And then how do they adjust to that?
Yeah, well, it becomes really subjective, right? Because it's really my impression of it. And so all I have to go off is telling them well, I know that you may be doing it there, but it doesn't sound like you're doing it. It has to sound like you're doing it. You don't have to actually be doing it, Yeah. And there's give and take there, because they're so used to also allowing their physicality and their facial expressions to tell story, right? But you don't have that in the radio. So in certain moments, they were letting their face do the acting, but I have to be like, well, I can see that you're doing it, but it doesn't sound like you're doing it. So I know you don't want to be an actor where you're vocally expressing certain moments, but you actually have to. And because these are extraordinary actors that let their bodies be the instruments, there's a real kind of resistance to that because it's programmed, right? So it was fascinating getting them to reprogram their instrument just to allow themselves to vocalize in ways that they just were not used to.
Fantastic. Well, you're continuing in this medium, and your current project is Romeo y Julietta. And I understand that you are actually zooming in, not from New York, but from Florida, where you're doing post-production. So back to the sort of origin scene of your Twelfth Night with its Florida setting.
Yes, that's true. There's a lot of those with this, yeah.
And also, of course, Romeo and Juliet was the first play, Shakespeare play that you performed in, as you shared with us. So this is a
Yes.
return in many ways. And it's also you're continuing with these audio experiments. And so I understand that this is going to be bilingual. You've adapted it with Ricardo Gonzalez, and that Lupita Nyong'o is going to play Julieta. And so, what can you tell us about this production, your vision, your process? We're super excited to
Yeah.
get to hear this.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. So another kind of full circle connection moment is that production of Romeo and Juliet that I mentioned in Kenya in 1998 was the first time that I met my friend Lupita Nyong'o, because she was playing Juliet in that production that I was playing Mercutio. So another yeah, beautiful confluence of constellations.
That's a pretty amazing
Yeah,
cast that produces you
yeah.
and she.
Yeah, and you know, her being someone who is Kenyan, who is Mexican born, who is bilingual herself, we had been talking about doing a production of Romeo and Juliet, not the bilingual, at the Delacorte, and it fell through. And so when this opportunity came to think about another radio play, I thought, well, I'm interested in continuing my exploration of bilingual Shakespeare. I'd actually done a workshop of a trilingual Romeo and Juliet with English, French, and Spanish set in New Orleans in the 1800s. So it was a bit much. But with Lupita, just her identity and the surprise factor of like a Black actor who speaks Spanish as well, who has an African and a Mexican identity. For me, those moments of kind of disruption of our expectations of identity are really exciting to me. And so the notion of doing a radio play with her playing Julieta and then building this cast of bilingual actors, I thought there's just an opportunity, and especially because the play is one that the most widely read, the most widely performed, everyone knows Romeo and Juliet. So you can take liberties with it in a way that I couldn't with Richard II, in ways that brought in an audience that was perhaps more Spanish speaking or bilingual, and allowed English speaking audiences to have more of a sense of the story and to follow. And I really wanted to move the equation further in terms of what I had done with Twelfth Night, which I said was like 20% Spanish. So I wanted to tip the scale. I wanted this to be 55% Spanish and 45% English, because it can survive that. And again, just like really, really going forward with that mission of accessibility. And so I worked with Ricardo Perez Gonzalez again. Ricardo did the translation of Twelfth Night as well, the what we use for Spanish. But this time I wanted to use an existing Spanish translation. I had looked at at a couple of different translations. Oh my goodness, I'm blanking. The Neruda. I looked at the Neruda because he has a Spanish translation. But Neruda's is more of an adaptation and less of a translation. And so I really wanted to find something where, to the ear, there was almost a direct correlation with the meter, with the imagery, with the text in both languages. And so I found Alfredo Mocanesi's, which Ayanna Thompson recommended to me, and it's such a beautiful translation. So with Ricardo's help with language and dramaturgy, I wanted to find a way in which there was a relationship that was truly bilingual. I wasn't interested in creating a division based on language in the play. I didn't want one side to speak Spanish, another side to speak English. We've seen that production enough times, identity dividing, the Capulets and the Montagues. I wanted to tell a story of tribalism that was less evident on the exterior. I wanted to tell a story where this is a bilingual society, but it's not about that everyone speaks both English and Spanish, that everyone has that facility, but like the divisions are just less on the skin, are less a sense of like visible identifiers of people. And so we created a template that was kind of built on our own dramaturgical sense of the relationship of like what parts are more interesting if they're in Spanish, what parts does it make sense to make that switch happen. And then I was interested in a process with the actors where actors were going to bring their own sense of identity, because we all have different senses of that, right? There are people who are born in a certain place, and so they grew up speaking that language first. There are people who were born somewhere else, and so they traveled back, or their sense of family has that. And so they have a different kind of Spanish. It's the second language for them, as opposed to a first language, as opposed to something that I know is part of my identity. And I really wanted that sense of individuality to come through. I also wanted a sense of national identity to come through, not to create a homogenous, like it's set in Puerto Rico, and so everyone has a Puerto Rican dialect. No, I wanted people to be able to have Argentinian Spanish or Puerto Rican or Colombian or Ecuadorian, and not homogenize, not like distill or simplify, and allow that to exist. Because that's when we cast people who have different dialects in Shakespeare, we allow them to have their dialects. So why not allow people who are speaking Spanish to have their dialects as well? And so that sense of variety, that sense of allowing like cultural nuance to exist, even in Spanish, was important to me. And so the actors got to also contribute to like what felt like a natural switch to them, what also sounded like a natural switch to them, to really imbue the text with a sense of specificity that was around these people's identity. And then because it's Romeo and Juliet, and I didn't, one of the powers of radio is the listener's imagination, because when you're on stage, you have to make decisions about geography, about culture, because you have like physical environment, you have props. So when are we? Where are we? What do the clothes look like? Are important. On the radio, you don't need to make those decisions because you don't see those items. And so I was also interested in an imaginative space where we didn't have to be set in a certain physical location. It's just a place where people are bilingual, and you get a sense of the city, you get a sense of its contemporary, but then you can really use your imagination to place it in a geography that makes sense to you. And so I didn't want to limit it in a way that I would have had to on stage, because we're not on stage. It's a different kind of imaginative space. And so that's how I got there, and those are the characteristics that I've been interested in for this production.
And would you happen to have anything you can share with us?
I do. So this is like very, very, for this audience only. I just received this cut yesterday, so I'm going to share a snippet from the balcony scene for you to hear the scene when the two lovers first see each other. We're still in the process of post-production, so this is like being invited to like a preview or a dress rehearsal where you get to hear it. So I'm going to play that for you right now.
He jests at scars that never felt a wound. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? Es el oriente, y Julieta el sol. Álzate, sol hermoso, and kill the envious moon, enferma y pálida de dolor, pues tú, sierva suya, eres mucho más bella. No la sirvas más, si es tan envidiosa. Su atuendo virginal de un verde triste no le va más que a los tontos. Cast it off. Ay, es mi dueña, es mi amor. Si lo supiera. Oh, she speaks. Yet she says nothing. What of that? Her eye discourses. I will answer it. Ay, pero qué atrevido. It is not to me she speaks. Un par de las estrellas más hermosas del cielo dejaron su lugar y les rogaron a sus ojos brillar en ese sitio hasta su vuelta. What if her eyes were there, they in her head? Su resplandor las opacaría como el sol a las antorchas. El brillo de sus ojos en el éter celeste sería tal que las aves cantarían, creyendo que la noche es la mañana. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand? Ay, que yo fuera un guante en esa mano para tocar su rostro.
Ay, qué triste.
Sí, habla. Habla de nuevo, ángel de luz.
Oh, Romeo. Romeo. ¿Por qué eres Romeo? Niega a tu padre y rechaza tu nombre. O si prefieres, jura que me amas y yo ya no seré una Capuleto.
Shall I hear more? Shall I speak at this?
Mi enemigo es tu nombre, nada más. Tú eres tú mismo, seas Montesco o no. ¿Qué es Montesco? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. Así, Romeo, si no fuera Romeo, aún sería perfecto. muerto sin llamarse así. Arráncate el nombre, Romeo, y a cambio de lo que no es parte de ti, tómame entera.
I take thee at thy word. Llámame amor y me bautizo nuevamente. De hoy en adelante ya no seré Romeo.
What man art thou that thus bescreened in night, so stumblest on my counsel?
Right.
It's just so exciting, and I'm reorganizing my spring Shakespeare class around this. UC Irvine is a
Oh,
Hispanic
fantastic.
serving institution. We have 30% of our students come from Spanish-speaking households. I'm
Oh,
so
excellent.
excited to get to teach this and have this be my text and my performance for my spring class.
Oh, fantastic.
Really-
Fantastic. Yeah, we're going to publish the text. So we'll have a published text that reflects this production, the bilingual production alongside
Oh,
it.
that's just so
yeah.
incredible. Well, we have some questions from the audience, but we don't have a whole lot of time left with you tonight. And so one of the questions has to do with Parsi theater and the theater of the Zoroastrian community in India, and its use of English language text to really transform and create drama in India. This is from Manek, one of our guests here tonight. Do you have any thoughts about Parsi theater and how it impacts world theater?
Oh, I'm sorry to say that I'm not so familiar with it that I could speak to it, but I'm really fascinated to find out more. I will definitely look it up, but I haven't had the privilege yet of experiencing any of it or hearing about it.
Okay, well, that was thank you, Manek, for that fascinating
Yes.
comment, and we're definitely interested. Actually,
Oh,
one of my graduate students has written on this topic, so it's very exciting.
Fantastic.
Question, Manek. One of my students, Chloe Lowe, is here tonight, and she studied Shakespeare with me as an undergraduate here at UC Irvine. And she wants to know, is there a play by Shakespeare that you would really like to direct next? Well, you're going to have gone through Twelfth Night. I think you've done a Henry play as well. Richard, Romeo and Juliet. What's on the horizon after Romeo and Juliet in terms of Shakespearean productions?
Well, Troilus and Cressida has been on my wish list for a while. I just think it's such a fascinating, complicated, impossible play, and usually when they have like an impossible element to it, I'm hooked. So that's definitely a play that I would like to wrestle with at some point. Timon of Athens too. Like I remember reading a scene from it like many years ago and just thinking, wow, there's like, how do you take that and make that make sense? So yeah, Troilus and Timon, those are two plays that I'd like to tackle at some point in the near future.
Yes. I want to see your Timon especially. That is really fascinating. This is a question from Haya Bachiri, who's a PhD student in drama from UC San Diego, and she's in our joint PhD program here at UC Irvine. And she asks you, what do you think is the most important piece of advice for people who are attempting radio play Shakespeare, especially during this multifaceted moment in history?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's definitely finding a way that Shakespeare speaks to the current moment. That's always been crucial for me, finding a way in which it feels like it's relevant, it feels like it has resonance. To me, going back to a classical play, I love working on new plays, and because new plays, like they're elastic, they're malleable, they're also like indirect. You have the playwright next to you, so you're really like in dialogue with the creative force behind it. And whenever I work on a classical text, that's crucial for me to unlock something that interests me personally, subjectively, and also that I feel like it has something to say to the world. And so I feel like different plays can do that for different reasons at different moments. I've returned to, this is I think my third time working on Romeo and Juliet, second time. And so at every stage, third time, and every stage in my life I'm a different person, the world is a different place. So I think it's important to find how it can speak to the world as you see it. And also that it does something for you that as an artist, independent of the world you're interested in, centering people of color in the work that I do is crucial. So what if it's a Shakespeare? I have to find a way to make that true, and it doesn't mean it doesn't exclude other people. Like Richard II had like Dakin Matthews had extraordinary like white Shakespeare actors in there, but they weren't at the center. And for me, there's a deficit of that, and so I want to rectify that deficit. So that's why it's my personal mission to do that kind of work. And so I would say returning to a Shakespeare, finding your subjective take on it in a really kind of individual way, but also finding how it speaks to the world for you.
Beautiful, thank you. This is a question from Robin Kello, who's writing his dissertation on Shakespeare and immigration and refugee issues at UCLA in the English department. And he says, thank you, this is very exciting and inspiring, and he can't wait to see the Romeo and Julieta. And he wants to know about the Twelfth Night production. Can you talk more about how you brought in the Spanish? Did you make additions? What other kinds of directorial decisions did you make to really highlight that question of displacement? And are those issues also coming into the Romeo and Julieta production as well? Questions around immigration in particular.
Yeah, so for Twelfth Night, it was a lot more like directly baked into the concept and baked into the physical location of the play. Once I figured out Miami, South Beach, Cuba, and that moment, like if these two people are coming from a place and they're more conversant in Spanish and more comfortable with Spanish than they are in English, and that like reverting to your mother tongue, right? That I knew that that's where we were arriving. And so then I had to work backwards to figure out how to set that up in a way that made sense. So that first scene when she's on the shore and with the sailor, like, you know, the first words, like, so in the production, she spoke in Spanish at first, and then she went back and she found like the English language for it. So you understood, okay, this is someone who English is their second language. And so it's more effortful in a way that you understand that's the storytelling. And then in moments of privacy, in moments of intimacy with the audience, more of a facility with Spanish. So really deciding in each moment that Spanish was coming across dramaturgically, emotionally, where it made sense. And so for me to identify those moments and then talk to Ricardo about the dramaturgy and have him do the translation. And then with the actor figuring out, well, how is this? Is it comfortable? Would you say it a different way? Where are other moments that you think Spanish could come through? So really relying on, first of all, my construction of the world to be the first impulse, and then the playwright coming in to work with him on that, and then the actor, like at each stage, checking in to see like what feels natural, what feels organic, what's storytelling, so that each moment Spanish comes in, it's really specific and really deliberate. So I feel like there just has to be care taken, even in terms of like, you know, the dialect, and even in terms of like word choices, like, well, is this what people who speak Spanish in Florida say? Is this what someone who comes from Cuba would say? And you know, we're always operating outside of our level of experience, and so I think really leaning on people to allow that input is crucial, because you want to tell a story in a way that's exciting to you, but you also want it to be truthful and sensitive to like cultural specificity. So I feel like that's a really crucial component during the process.
Beautiful. And this is our last question of the evening. This is from our wonderful colleague, Daphne Lay, who's in the drama department, and she works on intercultural theater and Chinese opera. And she would like to know, when you're working with a diverse cast, doing that table reading that you brought us into at the beginning of your comments, when you're bringing that diverse cast together, how do you start? What question do you propose in order to get the conversation going from an intercultural perspective? How do you get them into that?
Well, I speak very personally from experience. I'm able to speak about like my place in the world, my questions in the world, what I feel like I have heard. I'm an American citizen. I'm naturalized. I've come from somewhere else. So I recognize that there's already a very specific racial history in this country that I am, you know, privy to, by virtue of coming here in my adulthood. And so I really rely on my friends, my colleagues, what I glean from the world around me to be able to speak to that, both from a subjective place, but also understanding that, my ancestors were not slaves in this country and don't bring that historical baggage with them in a really direct way. And so I speak from my own personal truth and the questions that I have, because you have to be vulnerable and allow yourself to share in order to get that in return. It has to be something that's symbiotic and that feels like, is truthful. And so if I want others to speak of their experience, I have to speak of my own and then create a space where there is an invitation, to be open, to be honest. And so I've just found that that really helps allow actors to bring themselves, because you want actors to not only bring themselves creatively, but you want them to bring their humanity. You want them to bring their own personal experience. You want all that to be part of a process of creating an ensemble, a room where people can feel like they can create, like they can share, like they can build something together. And so just like being really specific about what my perspective is and asking for perspectives and being really truthfully wanting to find ways in which to integrate that, or to feel like I can incorporate that somehow into what we're making. That's really important to me. And so I just feel like that dialogue and having it from jump, you really set the tone, you really set like, you set the bar from the beginning. So that first table read, that first conversation, that first sharing of a concept of something, like it's crucial, because it really sets the temperature of the process. So I would say just be really clear about what interests you and what you're asking. Allow people to feel like they can bring their full selves into the room and that it's welcome, invited.
Well, I feel like you brought your whole self to our Zoom conversation tonight, and you've benefited our audience, our students, our colleagues, our visitors from around the country who are here tonight. And we just want to thank you from the depths of our hearts for your artistry, your vision, your humanity, and your being willing to spend the evening with us, you in Florida and us in California.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Eli. Thank you for asking. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. And yeah, thank you.
Great. And thank you to our wonderful audience for showing up and
thank you,
asking
everyone.
great questions. And more is coming. We'll be in touch with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Sahim.
Bye.